Setting up the rear suspension with the torque arm and Watts link is a process I have been looking forward to ever since I settled on that system for my very custom 1970 Dodge Charger. To me, this is the most elegant pro touring suspension setup going for, a solid axle car like mine. By the end of this video, we're going to be cycling and testing the suspension for clearances, and along the way, we're also going to visit a new friend who has got the knack for making it flat. Hey y'all, I've got to get just like the last little brackets done on the Watts link before I have just about all the suspension geometry for this car, front and rear, all set up. And I started out building out this one front crossmember with the torque arm, get that installed, and show you kind of how all that stuff went together. It took a minute to figure out exactly how to set up this torque arm. I needed to kind of stare at it to figure out that this was actually in the same arc as these back links, so that everything lines up pretty good. The axle's at ride height, the links are set, they're bolted in, they're not welded in. But that gave me all the angles that I needed to set up where this cross member goes. And I'll get into the details of the exact setup once we come back and burn this in, because actually before I do all that, I have to cut out this little cross member here. I made it a while back. I don't really like it anymore. And it's heavy, it's inefficient, and it's just like the old way I used to make stuff. So I'm gonna get out the plasma cutter and we're gonna chop that thing out. One of the things that I've come to like about this particular plasma, I had a value brand before that, is that I don't have to regulate the pressure down. It does all that inside. That's pretty nice. The front of the torque arm mount slides together kind of like a drive shaft slip yoke. I leave 3/4 of an inch exposed for extension and compression under travel. And this bracket, I suppose you could square it to the rear axle as easily as you could the chassis. Since we're just talking about 6 inches of travel, I just squared it to the chassis. So the torque arm is in, and what is pretty cool about this whole system is like each one of like these links and some more I'm going to put in the back, they only do one job. It's really, really very specific, kind of elegant too. Part of the reason I cut out that cross member that was right here was it was going to be duplicative to what this was going to do in terms of like just holding the rails together, but then also just it was heavy. I didn't like the design, and quite frankly, I need this space to be able to fit exhaust and some other stuff. You'll notice that this is not boxed in, right? It's just 2 pieces of plate. These are both 3/16 chromoly, and this torque arm, all it's doing is controlling pinion angle through the range of travel, right? You've got these guys that are controlling axle location, front and back. This is only wanting to keep the pinion angle set through its range of travel. And anytime this guy is going to have some sort of upward push, it's going to translate up here to this mount. And it's actually pretty cool because it means that this bracket only has upward forces going on it, upward or downward. And in that case, you don't need boxing, right? Because there's no twisting that's making it to this bracket, not really. And, this is just a slider, and, because of that, I figured 2 heavy-duty, large bearing surfaces would be enough, and I didn't need to box it in. This is the Watts link bracket. These guys sit vertically, and I'll show you how they all go together when we get to that part of the process. But these have got lots and lots of side rotary movement to them, and they need a back plate like this to hold them together. In fact, this part, because this thing is so stinking long, needs a sleeve of DOM through it as well. I try to build all this stuff with a notion that I want to build it for 95% of its use case, right? I'm not worried about the edge case, like the 1% or whatever. I'm worried about 95% of the use. And then I add a safety factor on top of that. Candidly, that bracket probably could be made out of 1/8 inch. But the last thing that I want to have happen is a hard bolt, have a bunch of forces and waller out an 1/8 inch thick bracket. That's just not a lot of bearing surface. Bearing surface is the space inside a bolt hole that makes contact with the bolt itself. That's called a bearing. And whether you're thinking about a bearing for a crankshaft or just the contact surface between a bolt and a bolt hole, it's all the same idea. The more contact area you have, meaning the thicker the bracket is and the larger the bolt is, the more load you can spread across it. Now with that in mind, I've actually got to put together, I got to take this universal kit for the Watts link and start to figure out how those things are going to piece together, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Big guy in a little car. So this is what I got to put together next, is the Watts link. The Watts link is going to control all vertical movement, right, and keeping the axle centered. It does the same basic job as a panhard bar, but with a little bit less side-to-side movement, almost zero side-to-side movement. It's probably, from an axle perspective, the best way to keep the axle darn near perfectly centered throughout its range of travel. So a panhard bar would connect the frame here down to a mount here on the axle. And based on that lateral connection, just like I built for the Suburban those years ago, that would allow the axle to move up and down in an arc. See how the panhard bar on my Suburban's front suspension keeps the axle moving in a stable arc? Now there's like 24 inches of wheel travel on this setup, so the effect is greatly exaggerated, but on a street car, the Watts link takes this principle up a level. A Watts link adds a little dynamic to that by letting the panhard bar expand and contract, basically. That's what this pivot is all for. So you have two miniature panhard bars that can pivot here. So this guy will connect over to this bracket, and then that other bracket that I showed you a minute ago, that's exactly 4 inches longer, will mount here and then extend lower and connect to this part here. And what'll happen is as the axle moves up and down, this will pivot, allowing the basic two-piece panhard bar to telescope and get longer and shorter as it needs to. But enough dancing about architecture. Really, I just need to build the darn thing, because as soon as you see what I'm talking about, it's gonna make perfect sense. The first thing I gotta do is to mount the brackets so that I can at least get one link mount done, and then you'll see where we go from there. Threw the laser on it, but I'm gonna actually double check that. It's a little principle I like to follow, which is to measure things not just twice, but two different ways to make sure that the tool that I'm using is actually leading me down the correct path. I'm really glad I double checked that. This side was pretty well dead on, minor angle difference. I would have been able to work that out. So, confirmation over here and then correction over on the passenger side where it was off by about 1/4 inch. Not a huge deal. The Heim joint would have been able to soak up all of that variation, but I tell you what, I feel better knowing that is all just in line. Never set up a Watts link, so it's all new to me. But just finding not just ways to measure twice using the same method, although that has some value, but measure twice using a different method to check and verify any old way you can. Because once I burn this in, man, it's hard to move. I got a grinder, I can move the brackets, but I'd sure like them to be right the first time. Next thing I gotta do is set up the mounts, figure out where they're gonna go vertically. They just need to be 4 inches difference from one another, because this bracket is 4 inches tall, and we'll see how that goes together. The bracket locations and the links themselves, you kind of got to just put it all together at the same time. The Watts links themselves have got to be the exact same length. The frame brackets have got to be separated vertically the exact same amount as the pivot, which in this case is 4 inches. At ride height, the links have to be perfectly level. So you end up measuring everything and mocking up a situation to where
You're just trying a couple of different combinations, and then you get brave enough to make your first cut. Look, the video is deceptive because this is one day, just this little segment is one day of progress, double checking, measuring again, and then finally getting up the guts to cut and tack things in place.
So these mounts are supposed to be exactly the same length, and in my case, it is 19 5/8 inches. The reason it's symmetrical is because the pivot is on the back of the axle in the center, and the center of the car, that's where the roll center, all the suspension action happens, is dead in the middle of the car. So I'm gonna go install these, they're all tacked, and I'm gonna start to dial in where the frame brackets go. There's just a little bit of fiddling I need to do to move them into the exact position and get these links, now that they're the exact same length, parallel, level, flat, all of that stuff. Really closing in on the last little bit. I know I'm gonna have to fabricate some frame rail extensions, but this part is gonna be pretty easy.
When I started getting into this part of the project, I had no illusions about the level of work involved in adapting a universal kit to work with my custom frame on a car that would have never come with anything resembling this kind of suspension. All I really mean is that to get this done and fit correctly, I had my mind right about spending some time with the grinder. Kits like these obviously aren't marketed as bolt-on, but at least I don't have to fabricate the link mounts themselves, and it's just these little extensions. Half the time, I actually do remember to drill the vent hole before welding something in place. This is necessary so that superheated trapped air doesn't spurt through the weld puddle and end up landing a piece of slag in my lap. It's happened before. Level, square, perfectly in line, and almost ready to start cycling. I love the function and look of a Watts link. It's more race car stuff in a car that's way too big to be a real race car, but I like it anyway. And while I have to cycle and test for binding, I already know one spot that has some interference, and I'm gonna have to get out the grinder and cut just a bit more before moving forward any further. For a while now, I've known that I would have to modify this part of the frame. Either it was gonna have link mounts Frenched in, or it would need to be clearance to allow for the links to move inboard. Well, it ended up being the latter. One of the rear links to have a very slight inward cant and to be placed as wide as possible on the axle to minimize how much the tire can leverage on the link itself. It's the same line of thinking as to why coilovers are always placed as far outboard on the axle as possible. To get all that and still leave enough room to maybe package a muffler, I put everything in place and marked the frame for clearance. It's not a huge trim, but like always, I take my time and get it right. If any of y'all happen to see this on Facebook or even Instagram, you know folks kind of freaked out about this. To close this all up, I went to my favorite source of laser cut and bent plate, which is of course Send Cut Send. But we will take a quick pause because a friend of mine needed help burning together some shock mounts he made. And after spending all that time with the grinder, man, it was good to just lay down some beads.
So we'll just let those cool for a little bit and I'll throw oil on them afterward.
You want to throw the wiper blades on right now?
The PowerStop stuff?
Yeah.
Let's do that. That'll only take a minute. But why stop doing all of this to go change wipers? Quite frankly, it's just something I needed to do. I'm actually about to go on a trip to go hunting for this year. And I never remember to change the wipers. And it just happened to coincide where PowerStop was launching this new product. And of course, when you're friends, right, they're a friend to the channel and you and me, launch a new product, you do whatever you can to support them in it. And so it's just that easy. But anyway, let's get back to fabricating.
Now, just a minute there, Professor. We're actually going to visit a new friend to the shop, Mike from No Sins Customs.
Mike.
What's up, man, David?
Nice to meet you, man. Thank you very much for hosting.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to have you.
Mike is deep into squares and knows how to have a good, rowdy time. And was kind enough to let us come and oogle some of his builds.
They're both LS-based rigs. We got the Archangel here. It's a LS Next Dart-based block, 427 cubic inches with twin 75 millimeter turbos. On this setup, it's probably making around 1,800 horsepower. It's built to the gills. So yeah, let's fire it up. That's a sweet smell. Yeah, so y'all want to hear this one?
Yes.
This is Ruckus, the more popular truck. It's a 434 LSX. Probably makes around 700 horsepower right now on pump gas. The motor's built to handle 2,000 horsepower. It's a Thompson Motorsports LSX block, full forged. I'm a big believer in overbuilding, so I can just beat on it. I'll give her some gas here. This is the fun one, man. It's weird getting from one to another. I gotta remember what the hell I'm doing.
Okay, everything in here has horsepower with a comma in it. Let's go to stuff that is so far from having a comma in it, like, you know.
Oh, well, I think right here we got maybe like 135 horsepower.
Definitely less than 200.
Yeah. The bench seat was perfect until this last winter when the seat was so cold and hard. The wife went to get in and pushed on it and cracked it.
Oh, it
there.
cracked.
Yeah, but otherwise, man, the truck's super clean.
I actually ended up finding Mike on Instagram through his 5-quarter cut view right here. And he found me through the Suburban. It's pretty great, actually, just to spend time with folks that are just generally into cars and trucks.
Everything here, man, you know, it's built the good solid way from back in the Peterson's 4-wheel drive magazine.
Grow up in the late 90s and early aughts, just seeing stuff that's built and used, and it's like...
Yep. It's built just right. It really is.
Look, I'll take advice and criticism from a good builder like Mike. He gets it. Building things to be driven is where it's at.
So yeah, he kept this. My father died. He gave me this truck. The history of it is and my uncle pretty much just drove it straight into the Missouri River, you know. Ended up having to use the winch that's on that Blazer over there. They had to tether it to a tree to keep it from floating off and get a tank retrieval unit out there to get it out of the river. Yeah. Hillbilly stuff.
And like most folks with a square, there is a story and a lineage to at least one of the trucks. But look, don't mistake hillbilly for unskilled. In his spare time, Mike actually makes carbon parts like what you see on his trucks.
But it doesn't take a lot of effort, you know.
And he is pretty darn good at it.
See, I can take this fender off and just sit on the tire and change spark plugs. And this is a little bit more reinforced too. It could still lose weight because you've got to trim up all the flange, but I think that's around 7 pounds maybe.
The whole benefit of this social media thing is actually meeting other folks and hanging out with them. You know, funny enough, we ran across Mike's friend Robert on the way in. Like, I don't see a ton of Cuckvies on the road, and so it was neat checking out his very clean M1000.
It smells so good.
But the light was getting low, and it was about time for us to head back.
I tell you what, we just thought we were going to come and just hang out and like talk trucks for a minute. So you've been a wonderfully generous host, starting stuff up, and I'm sure glad I ran into Robert. Thank you for hosting, man.
Yeah.
We need to go wheeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or just go get in good trouble.
Yeah, let's do all that.
All that's left to do now is thoroughly cycle test the suspension and check for binding and clearances. Testing for interference and clearances now is so much easier than discovering a problem later on. That's why I'm just so darn persnickety about this, making sure that everything fits, because that 325 at full bump, you push down on the other side and it will hit the unibody. I mean, it's not an off-road truck, but I will have to make sure that the bump stops are perfectly placed. And here you can see the frame cutouts that will be plated in do in fact give enough room for the links to move up and down. Right about this time, you could not peel the smile from my face.
So everything is in, right? The links fit and clear through the range of travel. The torque arm fits and clears. The Watts link does what it's supposed to. And isn't that system cool? It's a whole reason why I did this rear suspension is I wanted a Watts link. I love those suspensions and I think that they're really neat. Everything works, which, knock on wood, right? But the fun part and what I remember about setting up the Suburban was how much effort went into cycling to make sure that later on I didn't run into a problem that I couldn't fix. And that's where I'm at right now. And boy, do I have a lot of brackets to weld in. And that's really what I'm going to do over this coming holiday break. So for Christmas time for us, we spend a lot of that with family and friends. And, I hope that, whatever you're celebrating, you get to do this exact same thing, right? This time of the year is exactly there for us to spend the time with the ones that we care the most about. And I hope that that's the time that you get to spend with those people that you care about. Thank you all for all the support. Thank you for the participation here. And until 2024, y'all take good care, okay?